The year was a pivotal moment in history, unfolding amidst the siege of Pamplona, once the proud capital of the ancient kingdom of Navarre. The air hung thick and viscous, reminiscent of mashed fruit mash, heavy with the acrid scent of gunpowder, sweat, and mounting panic. French artillery, renowned throughout Europe for its unparalleled precision and destructive power, had been relentlessly pounding the fortress walls for days on end, reducing the centuries-old citadel's mighty barriers into rubble and ruin. Inside the grim labyrinth of the besieged stronghold, a small handful of Spanish soldiers clung desperately to hope, their spirits waning with each passing hour. Among them, thrashing amid the chaos, was a 30-year-old man named Ignatius de Loyola. His finely tailored uniform, once spotless and pristine, was now smeared with dirt and blood, yet beneath its worn fabric, his unwavering spirit blazed with an unquenchable fire stained by the pride of Castile. Inigo was not a soldier by calling, a man of martial discipline or blood-stained combat. He was a courtier, a dreamer captivated by the allure of glory, heroic feats sung about in tales of chivalry, and the longing for acknowledgement from noble lady spectators who looked down from their lofty thrones of birth. Driven by this insatiable desire for fame and admiration, Inigo had defied common sense and convinced the fortress commander not to surrender, risking all for the hope of eternal fame. Now, standing on the most exposed part of the battlements, inhaling the poisonous fumes of smoke and debris, his eyes reflected a mixture of fear and reckless excitement. Suddenly, reality seemed to shift. The sky and earth seemed to flip their places. The terrible crack of a French cannonball tore through the air with devilish precision, hitting the wall mere yards from him, and fragments of stone struck him, knocking him senseless, while another ricocheted, passing treacherously between his legs and shattering bones in multiple places. Inigo fell to the ground, and with his fall, his world of nightly dreams, courtly intrigues, and fleeting vanities collapsed into ruins. Unbeknownst to him, this pain, this fracture of bones, was not merely defeat or injury. It was a humiliating precursor to something far greater. In the silence that followed, amid the long agony of recovery within his father's ancient castle, Inigo's soul was tempered like steel in a forge. The suffering would carve away his illusions of worldly fame, forging in him a new, nobler purpose. The pain was the crucible, an experience that would replace the fleeting desire for earthly glory with an unquenchable hunger for divine acclaim. As the days of convalescence stretched on, he would see clearly that the defeat in battle was not an end, but a rebirth. The pain and the broken bones signified a transformation, an awakening of the spirit. From that moment on, his restless yearning would shift from superficial praise to a steadfast pursuit of spiritual greatness, guided by divine inspiration rather than fleeting earthly praise. Eventually, this hunchbacked Basque nobleman, scarred but resilient, would ascend to become a general of an unprecedented army, an army that would not don armour or wield swords, but would conquer through intellect, discipline, and faith. Its battlefield would be the entire world, and its weapon would be the mind itself. No one could have foreseen, on that very day, amidst the thunder of cannons beneath the walls of Pamplona, that a new movement was being born, the first Jesuit. To comprehend why such an organisation emerged, why the Society of Jesus would prove so remarkably effective and in demand, we must first delve into the atmosphere and spirit of the world from which it arose. The dawn of the 15th century was not a simple marking of new dates on a calendar. It was a seismic shift in the consciousness of Europe. It was an era charged with dizzying change, heightened hopes, and profound spiritual crisis, a time when the old medieval world was collapsing before the eyes of all. The Renaissance, which originated in Italy, reopened Europe's eyes to antiquity, rediscovering the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. Brilliant humanists like Erasmus of Rotterdam studied ancient Greek and Latin texts firsthand, advocating for a purified Latin language and a critical approach towards sacred and secular writings alike. This intellectual explosion ignited a wave of unprecedented freedom of thought, gradually undermining the unquestioned authority of medieval theology that had long held sway in universities. Meanwhile, the great geographical discoveries, such as Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic, Vasco da Gama's route to India, and Magellan's circumnavigation, expanded the known world far beyond Europe's traditional borders. It was now evident that vast continents, inhabited by millions of peoples who had never heard of Christ, lay beyond the horizon, challenging the very notions of the known universe and spiritual dominion. In the 15th century, a profound challenge arose to the universal authority of Christianity and consequently to the missionary efforts undertaken by the Church. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-1400s ignited an information revolution that can be likened to the advent of the internet in later centuries. Ideas now spread with unprecedented speed, breaking down the barriers of limited access. The Bible, once a sacred text accessible only to a select few, suddenly became available to thousands. For the first time, anyone who had basic reading skills could interpret the scriptures independently, bypassing the traditional role of clergy as intermediaries. However, the primary source of unrest stemmed from a deepening crisis within the Church itself. By the dawn of the 15th century, the papacy had reached heights of secular power and immense wealth, yet it was also plagued by an unparalleled decline in moral integrity. During the Renaissance, the popes of Rome began to behave more like Italian princes than spiritual shepherds. They engaged in wars, intricate political machinations, and extravagant building projects, creating opulent palaces and grand cathedrals to display their prestige. At the same time, they became patrons of renowned artists such as Michelangelo and Raphael, whose masterpieces still adorn the world's churches and museums. Yet, this glittering facade was maintained at a heavy cost, and the burden was borne by all of Europe. One of the most notorious figures of this period was Pope Alexander VI, a member of the Spanish Borgia family, who ruled from 1492 until 1503. His papacy was marked by corruption, nepotism, and scandal, as he openly dispensed bishoprics and cardinals' hats to his illegitimate children, turning the Vatican into a nest of vice and favoritism. Another figure, Pope Julius II, reigning from 1503 to 1513, and often called the warrior pope, spent more time leading military campaigns and commanding armies than engaging in spiritual duties. His leadership was as martial as it was papal. Meanwhile, Pope Leo X, from the Medici family and ruling until 1521, was a wealthy patron and a renowned bon vivant. His famous remark, "God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it," epitomized the extravagance that characterized his reign. As his primary goal was to complete the construction of the magnificent St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, he sought the immense funds necessary for this endeavour. But how could such vast sums be obtained? The answer lay in a practice that quickly turned into widespread corruption: the sale of indulgences. An indulgence was a document certifying the remission of temporal punishment for sins that had already been forgiven through confession. According to church doctrine, even after one's sins were absolved, the soul still needed to undergo purification in purgatory. An indulgence issued by the Pope, who was believed to control the treasury of saints and Christ's merits, could shorten or fully eliminate this purification period. Initially, indulgences were granted for acts of piety, such as pilgrimages, prayers, or participation in crusades. However, by the early 15th century, this practice had devolved into outright commercial trade. Throughout Europe, papal agents travelled from city to city, selling indulgences for monetary gain. The trade in indulgences reached particularly cynical heights in Germany, where a Dominican friar named Johann Tetzel toured towns with the boastful slogan, "As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs." These sales were not limited to the living. Indulgences were also bought for deceased relatives, an idea that shocked many and was regarded as a blasphemous commodification of salvation. Alongside this rampant mercantilism went another corrupt practice, simony, the buying and selling of church offices and positions. Bishoprics and abbeys were treated as commodities, bought and sold like ordinary goods. Many bishops never set foot in their dioceses, regardful of them merely as sources of income rather than as spiritual leaders. Such widespread corruption deeply undermined the moral authority of the Church, setting the stage for future upheavals that would eventually challenge the very foundations of Christian Europe. Throughout history, the highest ranks of the clergy enjoyed unparalleled luxury and wealth, while the lower echelons, comprising parish priests and local clergy, often found themselves mired in poverty, ignorance, and an inability to provide their congregations with proper spiritual guidance. Celibacy and the obligation of priestly chastity were frequently violated, undermining the moral authority of the Church. Once revered monasteries, centres of spiritual learning and enlightenment, began to decline in many regions, transforming instead into vast landowning corporations amassed with riches. These developments fueled growing discontent and complaints across all levels of society, creating a fertile ground for unrest. The peasants harboured resentment against the Church for its heavy tithes and extortions, seeing in them a symbol of exploitation. Town dwellers resented its wealth and privileges that set it apart from common life, and secular rulers despised the Church's interference in their affairs, especially given the massive sums of money flowing from their realms into the papal treasury. Humanists and intellectuals looked upon the clergy with contempt, criticising their ignorance, superstition, and superciliousness. The atmosphere grew tense, filled with the faint rumble of an impending storm. The Church appeared akin to an ulcer festering beneath the surface of society, ready to rupture at the slightest provocation. All that was needed was a single courageous individual willing to make the touch that would bring it to a head. Such a person eventually appeared, someone willing to pierce the surface and challenge the status quo, within the quiet walls of an Augustinian monastery in the German town of Wittenberg. Meanwhile, in distant, cold Germany, a young man named Martin Luther was engaged in a different and far more agonizing struggle, a battle for the salvation of his soul. While in Spain, a young Spaniard named Ignatius de Loyola was dreaming of chivalric deeds and serving at the court of Spanish nobility. Luther was confronting his own inner demons. Born into a modest family of Saxon miners, Luther possessed a formidable intellect, unwavering determination, and a profound, almost fervent religious conviction that bordered on obsession. Against his father's wishes, who envisioned him as a successful lawyer, Luther, paralysed by a terror-stricken experience during a violent thunderstorm, made a momentous decision. He entered the Augustinian monastery, renowned for its strict discipline, yet life within the monastic walls failed to bring him the peace he sought. He subjected himself to rigorous fasting, endless prayers, vigils, and self-flagellation in an attempt to purify himself. Nonetheless, an acute sense of sinfulness and a relentless fear of divine righteous wrath haunted him constantly. The more he endeavoured to earn salvation through works, the more he doubted his worthiness, sinking deeper into despair. A transformative spiritual awakening came to him during his study of the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans. It was from those scriptures that a new, astonishing truth dawned upon him, one that would forever alter his worldview. He realized that salvation was not a reward for good deeds, nor something that could be bought through indulgences, nor earned via ascetic acts. Instead, it was a divine gift, bestowed solely by God's grace, a free and unearned blessing granted through faith in Jesus Christ's atoning sacrifice. Salvation, in its essence, was not dependent on human efforts, but was a divine gift accessible through genuine belief. This revolutionary doctrine, known as justification by faith alone, became the cornerstone of Luther's teachings and the powerful force capable of dismantling the centuries-old structure of medieval Catholicism. Consequently, he reached the conclusion that the complex system of church sacraments, rituals, pilgrimages, veneration of saints and relics, and especially indulgences, all of which purported to secure salvation, were in fact mere human inventions, shielding believers from the true Christ. The Bible, rather than any ecclesiastical authority or tradition, should be regarded as the supreme authority in matters of faith. Every believer was called to read and interpret the Holy Scriptures personally, recognizing them as the sole source of divine revelation and truth. The act of nailing the famous theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church in October of 1517 marked a turning point in European history, signalling the beginning of a profound upheaval within the Christian world. It was more than a simple protest. It was a direct challenge to the long-standing authority of the papacy and the complex hierarchy of the Catholic Church, which had for centuries governed spiritual life across the continent. Martin Luther, a Catholic monk and theologian, introduced the revolutionary idea of the priesthood of all believers, asserting that every faithful person, through faith and scripture, could approach God directly without relying on an intermediary priestly class. This doctrine effectively undermined the necessity of the rigid ecclesiastical structure that had entrenched itself over centuries, making the entire hierarchy increasingly vulnerable. This bold theological stance gained momentum. However, it was not merely theological discourse that propelled the movement forward. It was also the widespread scandal of the Church's corrupt practices, most notably the trade in indulgences. The sale of these ecclesiastical certificates, claimed to ease souls from purgatory, had become a profitable business, and the Church's blatant commercialization of salvation infuriated many devout believers. When Johann Tetzel, a notorious preacher of indulgences, arrived near Wittenberg, preaching that buying indulgences could secure admission into heaven, the final straw was drawn. By that time, Martin Luther's patience had worn thin. Touched by the greed and moral decay he saw in such practices, he grew increasingly disillusioned. On the last day of October, which coincided with the eve of All Saints' Day in that year, Luther is traditionally believed to have nailed his 95 theses to the door of the church, though some details are more legend than verified fact. These theses, composed in Latin, sharply criticized the sale of indulgences and questioned the authority of the Pope to forgive sins, challenging the very foundation of ecclesiastical authority. At this time, Luther still did not entirely separate himself from Rome. Instead, he aimed to reform rather than break away from the church. Thanks to the invention of the printing press, His propositions, initially meant for scholarly debate, were swiftly translated into German and disseminated across Germany within a fortnight, reaching the broader European community in approximately a month. Luther himself was astonished by the rapid and widespread reaction his critique ignited. He had struck a nerve with a population exhausted by the excessive taxation, corruption, and abuse of authority by the papal system. The initial reception from Rome was dismissive. Pope Leo X derisively called Luther's dispute a monkish squabble. But as the movement grew and more adherents rallied around Luther's ideas, the church authorities realized that they faced a serious challenge. By the year of his writing, Luther was summoned before the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V at the Diet of Worms, a significant assembly where he was pressed to recant his beliefs. The moment has become legendary. Faced with the imperial tribunal, Luther boldly declared that he could not recant and only hoped that God's guidance would lead him true. His resolute stance became a defining moment in the struggle for religious reform. The emperor then declared Luther a heretic and put him under imperial ban, effectively outlawing him and his teachings. Yet Luther's safety was secured by his protector and prince, Frederick the Wise of Saxony, who concealed him in the Wartburg castle. In the seclusion of this fortress, Luther undertook his most ambitious and enduring project, translating the Bible's New Testament into German. This translation brought the scriptures directly to the people, empowering ordinary individuals to read and interpret the sacred texts for themselves. Additionally, this work significantly contributed to the development of the modern German literary language, making it accessible and recognizable as a literary and cultural standard. Luther's ideas did not remain confined to Germany. They ignited a chain reaction across Europe. Many German princes saw in the Reformation an opportunity to assert independence from papal and imperial authority, and to secularize vast wealth by confiscating and controlling church lands. Support for Luther's movement gained strength among these secular rulers, further destabilizing the religious landscape. Alongside Luther, other reformers arose, each proposing their own variations of the Protestant ideology. In Switzerland, Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich and John Calvin from Geneva developed more radical forms of Protestantism, emphasizing strict doctrinal purity and moral discipline. Calvin's teachings, especially his doctrine of predestination and a rigorous moral code, became the ideological foundation for the emerging bourgeoisie, the rising middle class seeking stability, discipline, and spiritual reassurance. Calvinism spread beyond Switzerland into France, where its followers were called Huguenots, into the Netherlands and Scotland, where they became Presbyterians, and into England, where its influence gave rise to Puritanism. In England, King Henry VII, after failing to obtain a divorce from the Pope, broke away from Rome to establish the Anglican Church, declaring himself its supreme head. He dissolved monasteries, seized their considerable wealth, and established a new religious structure aligned with his authority, thus profoundly transforming the religious and political fabric of the nation. In conclusion, the Protestant Reformation, sparked by Luther's bold critique and subsequent actions, did not merely challenge the authority of the Catholic Church, but also reshaped the entire societal landscape of Europe. It catalyzed the rise of individual interpretation of faith, diminished the Church's temporal power, and paved the way for widespread cultural, political, and religious transformation that would influence the continent for centuries to come. The Christian world, which for over 1,000 years had remained united under the authority of the Pope of Rome, eventually experienced a profound split. This division marked the beginning of an era fraught with religious conflicts, a turbulent time during which Europe was drenched in blood for approximately 1.5 centuries. The Catholic Church found itself in the depths of its most severe crisis ever faced in its long history. It was losing both its followers across the lands and its influence in political and societal affairs. It seemed as though the Church's days were numbered, and the situation was approaching a breaking point. During this turbulent period, the Church was desperately in need of new defenders, loyal, cunning, and ruthless warriors who could halt the tide of Protestant reforms and reclaim the wandering souls back into its fold. It was in this critical moment that a new figures emerged on the historical stage: chronicler Basque and Dauga, whose own spiritual rebirth began nearly simultaneously with Martin Luther's Reformation. Let us take a step back to the castle of Loyola, where a wounded man named Inigo was painfully and slowly recovering after the injury he sustained. His early surgical attempts had been crude, and as a result, his bones healed improperly. One leg became shorter than the other, and a grotesque bony growth had formed on his knee, interfering with the elegant, tight-fitting garments of the courtier. For a vain man like Inigo, this deformity was worse than death itself. Driven by vanity, he demanded a second, even more painful operation. The surgeons, without mercy, broke his leg again, removed the bony protrusion, and to lengthen the shortened limb, attached heavy weights to his leg, subjecting him to days of relentless torment. Despite the excruciating pain and the brutal treatment, Inigo bore it all with stoic resilience, refusing to utter a single cry. However, this series of injuries and suffering brought an end to his career as a courtier and warrior. From that moment, he could no longer serve in the capacity he once had. He was effectively rendered incapacitated. He became a cripple, in the literal sense. To fend off the boredom of prolonged convalescence, he requested to be given some of the knightly romances he cherished throughout his life. Unfortunately, none of these stories could be found in his confinement. Instead, the servant brought him only the life of Christ and a collection of saints' hagiographies. With nothing else to do, Inigo began to read these texts, and gradually a miracle unfolded within him. The tales of saints like Francis of Assisi and Dominic, their heroic deeds and spiritual victories, captivated his imagination more than any adventures of the legendary knight Amadis of Gaul. In those stories, he perceived a higher form of chivalry, one of spiritual nobility, an ideal far surpassing worldly honour. He saw in these saints a different kind of heroism, one rooted in faith, sacrifice, and divine service. This led him to compare his former life, filled with worldly pursuits, vanity, and sins, with the noble service of these spiritual warriors of Christ. Within his soul, a fierce internal struggle ensued. During the daylight hours, he still dreamt of his beloved lady, but during the nights, visions of Christ and saints haunted him. As he reflected deeply, he realized that thoughts of earthly glory left behind a hollow sense of emptiness and sorrow, whereas contemplating a life dedicated to serving God brought him lasting peace and profound joy. This simple yet profound observation about the nature of spiritual fulfillment would later become one of the fundamental principles of his emerging spiritual philosophy. Finally, a decisive change took place. Inigo resolved to break free from his past life and dedicate himself entirely to the service of God. His decision was to become a pilgrim, an adventurous journey into the Holy Land, culminating in Jerusalem. After recovering sufficiently, he left his ancestral castle behind. During his journey, he stopped at the renowned Benedictine sanctuary of Montserrat. There, he spent 3 days in confession, revealing to the monk every sin of his past life. Throughout that night, following the customs of medieval knights, he kept vigil before the altar of the Virgin Mary, immersed in prayer and reflection. At dawn, he took off his sumptuous garments, gave them to a beggar, and clothed himself in a humble rough cloak suited for pilgrimage. He also hung his sword and dagger before a statue of Madonna, symbolically renouncing worldly weapons and honours, fully embracing his new spiritual mission. From that moment onward, his only weapon would be unwavering faith. The man who once held a prominent position at the royal court, the courtier Inigo de Loyola, had passed away. In his place was a pilgrim named Ignatius. For the next 11 months, he secluded himself in a small town called Montserrat, a period marked by profound spiritual trials and luminous revelations. During this time, he lived in a rocky cave, sustenance coming solely through charity, while he subjected his body to rigorous fasting and self-flagellation. Every day, he wrestled with frightening temptations, dark doubts, and moments of despair so intense that at times he wondered whether life was worth continuing, even on the verge of contemplating suicide. Yet, it was precisely in that desolate spiritual wilderness, amid suffering and silence, that he discovered what he had been seeking. Ignatius experienced a series of mystical visions that, in his view, imparted insights far deeper than those offered by any university professor or scholar. Among these profound experiences, he glimpsed the divine Trinity in the act of creating the universe and witnessed a remarkable vision of human nature through the lens of Christ. These visions provided the foundation for his most important work, his defining spiritual guide, a modest manuscript titled Spiritual Exercises. This book was not meant merely to be read like a typical book. Rather, it served as a detailed manual for a rigorous 4-week spiritual retreat. Designed as an intense training, its participants would undertake solitary contemplation under the guidance of an experienced spiritual director, engaging in a carefully structured system of meditations, reflections, and prayers. Its primary purpose was to radically transform the consciousness of the practitioner, purging the soul of sinful attachments and aligning the person's will with that of God. The first week of exercises focuses on reflecting deeply on sin, its consequences, and the concept of hell. Its aim is to evoke a profound sense of repentance and an awareness of human frailty before God's majesty. During the second week, the practitioner immerses himself in contemplating the life of Christ, from the incarnation to his triumphant entry into Jerusalem. Through vivid imagery and the use of all senses, he is encouraged to step into the biblical scenes, to follow Christ's journey, to hear his words, becoming an active participant rather than a distant observer. The climax of this week's meditation involves a powerful exercise in choosing allegiance, where one reflects upon and consciously decides between the two banners, the banner of Christ and the banner of Lucifer. This decisive act aims to solidify one's commitment to follow Christ wholeheartedly. The third week is dedicated to contemplating the sufferings and passion of Christ. Its goal is to deepen compassion for the Saviour's torment and to reinforce the resolve to remain faithful to him, no matter the hardships. The final fourth week is centered on meditating upon Christ's resurrection and ascension, filling the soul with joy, hope, and love for God. The ultimate aim of all these spiritual disciplines is to cultivate a state of holy indifference, an attitude of complete detachment from worldly possessions, health, reputation, or any temporary earthly comfort, creating a readiness to accept whatever divine will may come, without hesitation or fuss. The spiritual exercises begins with the affirmation that humans are created for a singular purpose, to praise, honour, and serve the Lord God, and through that service to attain salvation. These exercises have become a powerful tool for shaping a new kind of Christian, one who is disciplined, purposeful, and devoted, ready to go anywhere and do anything for the greater glory of God. This guiding principle would serve as the central motif of Ignatius's entire future religious order. Essentially, it was a system designed to forge spiritual commandos, soldiers prepared to operate effectively in any environment, maintaining unbreakable discipline and absolute loyalty to their mission. Ignatius had effectively created a weapon, an instrument of spiritual combat. What he now needed was soldiers willing to wield it. After passing through the crucible of Montserrat's solitude and undertaking a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, a journey cut short when he was quickly expelled by the Franciscan friars concerned for his safety, Ignatius arrived at a stark realization. Mere piety and outward religious acts were insufficient. Deeper transformation, a radical renewal of the soul and will, was essential for truly changing the world through his vision of Christian service. In order to serve God effectively in a world torn apart by heresies and spiritual confusion, one must possess true knowledge. This knowledge is not merely superficial, it is an education, an erudition capable of standing firm against the theological sophistication and intellectual challenges posed by Protestants. Such understanding remains a rarity, and for almost 40 years, a nearly lame and broken veteran, barely able to read Latin, found himself compelled to sit alongside young boys in a classroom. This man, who had already endured many hardships, was studying in Barcelona, in Alcalá, and in Salamanca, centers of learning and religious training. His ascetic lifestyle and potent sermons drew followers to him, but at the same time they attracted suspicion from the Spanish Inquisition, which, on several occasions, detained him under accusations of heresy. Disillusioned by constant persecution, in the year 1528, he decided to journey to the heart of Europe's intellectual world. He travelled to the University of Paris, specifically to the University of Sorbonne, then the pulsating hub of philosophical and theological debate. It was amidst this vibrant environment, brimming with students engaged in spirited discussions and lectures, that this man discovered a circle of like-minded individuals who would later form the core of his devoted followers. His approach was subtle and indirect. He did not preach loudly in public squares, but operated through a different, more refined method. He lived in a shared room at the College of St. Barbara, together with two young students. The first was Peter Faber, a pious youth from Savoy, who would become his first disciple and most loyal supporter. The second was Francis Xavier, a noble and ambitious nobleman from Navarre, eager for a distinguished career within the church. This latter, proud and sometimes vain, was initially difficult for his spiritual mentor to reach. Yet, through patience and persistent effort, the man gradually found a way to win him over. His approach to Francis Xavier was multifaceted. He offered him both material support, helping with money, and admiration for his academic and athletic achievements. But above all, he constantly posed a single, probing question, borrowed from the Gospel. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? Over time, this question began to take root in the young man's heart. Eventually, the ice broke. Francis Xavier, who would later become the apostle to India and Japan, underwent a transformation through spiritual exercises and became the most devoted and fervent confidant of this mentor. Gradually, around them, a small circle of close followers gathered. These were young men from Spain, Diego Lainez and Alfonso Salmeron, who would later emerge as prominent theologians during the Council of Trent. Also present were Nicolas Babadil and Simon Rodriguez, who would make significant theological contributions. All of them distinguished themselves by their talent, intelligence, and education, having been personally guided through the crucible of rigorous spiritual exercises by their mentor. They called themselves friends in the Lord, bound together by shared faith and purpose. On the 15th of August in the year 1534, the day of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, this small band of 7 assembled in a humble chapel on the hill of Montmartre. At that time, Montmartre was still a suburb of Paris. The significance of this place was profound. According to tradition, it was the location where the first bishop of Paris, Saint Dionysius, was martyred. The chosen spot was deliberate. The only priest among them, Peter Faber, celebrated the Mass. After Holy Communion, they took their initial vows, a vow of poverty, a vow of chastity, and, most importantly, a commitment to journey to the Holy Land to convert the unbelievers there. If travel to Jerusalem proved impossible due to the threats posed by the expanding Ottoman Empire, they pledged to go to Rome instead. Their aim was to place themselves entirely at the service of the Pope, ready to be sent wherever their efforts were most needed. This day is regarded as the spiritual birth of what would later become the Society of Jesus. At that moment, they were not yet an official religious order, but rather a brotherhood united by friendship and a shared divine purpose. Following their studies, the members later met in Venice, eager to set sail for Palestine. However, the outbreak of war between the Venetian Republic and the Ottoman Empire made their original plan unfeasible. True to their vows and with their eyes fixed on their goal, they decided to walk on foot to Rome instead, demonstrating their unwavering commitment and resolve to serve the mission they had vowed to undertake. In the year 1537, these pioneers of spiritual reform appeared before Pope Paul II. This pontiff was a reformer himself, acutely aware of the profound crisis within the Church and actively seeking ways to breathe new life into its forsaken structures. His keen interest was piqued as he listened to these somewhat unusual, yet remarkably educated and fervently passionate priests. After careful consideration, he granted them permission to be ordained and approved their efforts to spread the faith. Inspired and energized, they began to evangelize on the streets of Rome, demonstrating their compassion by caring for the sick in hospitals and educating children in the fundamental principles of Christianity. The dedication and zeal displayed by Ignatius Loyola and his companions left a strong impression on those who witnessed their activities. It soon became clear to them that in order to maximize their effectiveness, they needed to formalize their brotherhood, transforming it into a new kind of religious order. Ignatius took the first step by drafting a constitution, which he named the Formulation of the Institute, or the Formula of the Society. This document was revolutionary in its conceptions. The new order, which they ultimately decided to call the Society of Jesus, was unlike any existing religious community. They deliberately rejected the traditional monastic lifestyle characterized by seclusion within cloisters. Instead, their monastery was to be the entire world, the sprawling cities, the rural villages, everywhere they could influence. They refused to wear the special monkish garb typical of other orders, opting instead to blend seamlessly into the secular environment, avoiding distinctions that could set them apart in the bustling streets. They also refrained from the long communal prayer sessions that took significant time away from other monastic communities. Their form of prayer was meant to be constant and inner, integrated into their active pursuits, rather than confined within the walls of a church or monastery. One of their most innovative ideas was the introduction of a fourth vow, in addition to poverty, chastity, and obedience, an absolute and unquestioning obedience to the Pope in matters related to their missionary work. This vow committed them to travel without delay, question, or hesitation to any part of the world the Pope might send them, whether to confront the Turks in India, to challenge heretics like the Lutherans, or to reach the remote tribes of the New World. They were bound to respond swiftly and faithfully. This final point profoundly influence the Pope himself. In a world where his authority was challenged by monarchs and reformers alike, the order provided him with a loyal, highly educated, and mobile fighting force, precisely what he needed to reinforce and expand his spiritual reign. Nevertheless, there was notable opposition within the papal court. Many cardinal officials feared that such a powerful, autonomous organization, directly subservient to the Pope, could threaten the traditional hierarchy. After long and intense debates, on the 27th of September in the year 1540, Pope Paul II officially approved the Society of Jesus through a papal bull. The document specified that the society was primarily established to improve souls through living a devout Christian life, to spread faith via public preaching and the dissemination of the Word of God, and to foster spiritual exercises and acts of charity. An essential aim was to educate children and those unfamiliar with Christian teachings, thus planting the seeds of faith in new generations. The army was thus forged, disciplined, mission-oriented, and ready for battle. Ignatius Loyola was unanimously chosen as the first general, truly a military leader in spirit. With the society now officially sanctioned, the campaign to restore and uphold the influence of Rome in the spiritual and geopolitical spheres was underway. As the society's foundational approval was granted, Loyola faced a formidable task, transforming a small brotherhood of friends into an organized, effective global institution. Drawing on his background as a soldier and his exceptional talent for organization, Loyola approached this challenge as if preparing an army for battle. His goal was clear: to create a unified, disciplined force capable of operating worldwide, an elite vanguard ready to carry out the Pope's will across lands and cultures. The organizational structures and foundational principles of the Society of Jesus, as outlined in its constitutions and diligently refined until the very end of its founder's life, stood out as remarkably innovative and ahead of their time. Central to the order's philosophy was the concept of obedience, an unwavering commitment that required a Jesuit to relinquish personal will entirely and submit wholly to the authority of his superior. Ignatius Loyola depicted this principle through vivid and often startling imagery. He insisted that a Jesuit in the hands of his superior should be treated like a cadaver, which could be moved and handled at will, like a staff in the hand of an elder, or like a crucifix, objects that must be respected and controlled entirely by their master. This was not meant to promote blind submission. Rather, obedience was to be rational and considered. Once an order was given, however, it was to be executed immediately without hesitation or doubt, as if the command had come directly from Christ himself. This quasi-military discipline endowed the order with exceptional mobility and operational efficiency. The hierarchical structure was rigid and centralized. At its apex stood a lifelong elected general, whose authority was virtually absolute. Residing in Rome, the general wielded vast powers, while overseeing provincial leaders, each responsible for managing the order's affairs within distinct countries or regions, known as provinces. These provincial superiors, in turn, supervised college rectors and the heads of other Jesuit houses. Such a clear vertical chain of command facilitated swift communication from the central authority to the most remote missionary outposts around the globe, ensuring coordinated and effective action across continents. Becoming a Jesuit was an extraordinarily arduous process. Ignatius Loyola devised a multi-layered selection and training system that could take up to 15 or 17 years. The first step was a rigorous vetting process, designed not merely to identify pious individuals, but to find those who were healthy, both physically and mentally, intelligent, energetic, and capable of rigorous study. Following this, the candidate entered a 2-year novitiate. This period was marked by intense spiritual trials. They undertook spiritual exercises, volunteered in hospitals caring for severely ill and often repulsive patients, embarked on pilgrimages without money, begging for alms, and taught catechism to children. The primary purpose was to humble their pride, verify their calling, and instill complete obedience. After successfully completing the novitiate, the novice made his first religious vows and received the habit, becoming a member of the order. The subsequent phase centered on intellectual formation. The novice studied the humanities, philosophy, and then spent 4 years immersed in theology. During this time, he often taught in Jesuit colleges, gaining valuable pedagogical experience. After ordination to the priesthood and several years of active service, he entered the final year of a rigorous spiritual and intellectual renewal known as the tertiate, or the third stage of testing. This was akin to a second novitiate, dedicated to deepening spiritual life and undertaking a fresh round of spiritual exercises. Only after completing all these steps, at around the ages of 30 or 35, was a Jesuit permitted to take the solemn vows of final obedience to the Pope. The order was divided into several categories. Most members became coadjutors, assistants who made 3 vows, including obedience. Only the most worthy and tested individuals entered the core of the order as professed members, who took not 3 but 4 vows, the final being a special vow of absolute obedience directly to the Pope. This meticulous system of selection and formation allowed the society to cultivate an elite core of highly motivated, intellectually equipped, and deeply committed individuals. These members possessed the qualities necessary to undertake the most complex and sensitive missions, fulfilling the order's overarching goal of service to the Church and the salvation of souls. Ignatius Loyola and his followers identified 3 primary spheres of influence, 3 major fronts on which they believed it was essential to wage a relentless struggle for the soul and future of the Church. The first of these was education, recognizing early on that the key to prevailing in the battle against the Reformation lay in shaping the minds of future generations. The Jesuits swiftly embarked on creating a vast network of schools across Europe. Their strategy involved establishing both secondary and higher education institutions, often free of charge, aimed at moulding the intellectual and spiritual foundations of young minds. The prototype of their educational model was the Roman College, which later became the Gregorian University in Rome. For the Jesuits, education was elevated to an extraordinary level of scholarly excellence. Their comprehensive curriculum was meticulously designed and codified in a document known as the Ratio Studiorum, which detailed every aspect of instruction. This program seamlessly combined classical liberal arts, Latin, Greek, rhetoric, and literature, with philosophy and mathematics, natural sciences, and of course, theology. The Jesuits were renowned for their pedagogical brilliance, having introduced systems of class divisions, rigorous examinations, and competitive assessments among students. They also innovatively incorporated theatrical performances as both pedagogical tools and means of propaganda. Their colleges attracted not only Catholic aristocrats, but also members of Protestant nobility, making their influence widespread across different social spheres. Through education, they carefully cultivated entire generations of European elites, kings, military leaders, scholars, and government officials, raising them as loyal sons of the Catholic Church. By the time of Loyola's death in 1556, around 100 Jesuit colleges were already in operation. A century later, this number had grown to over 500. This extensive network represented the most effective educational system in the world at that time. The second critical area of their activity was missionary work. True to their fourth vow of unwavering obedience and allegiance, Jesuits took on the role of pioneers in Catholic missions worldwide. They ventured into the most remote and perilous corners of the globe, carrying the message of Christianity to Protestants in Europe, to pagans in the Americas, and followers of ancient religions in Asia. Their missionary strategy, especially in Asia, proved to be revolutionary. Unlike other monastic orders, the Jesuits adopted a policy of cultural accommodation. They did not demand that converts abandon their traditional customs and beliefs outright. Instead, they immersed themselves deeply into the language, culture, and philosophy of the peoples they sought to evangelize. For example, they became like the Chinese for the Chinese, or like the Indians for the Indians, in order to present Christianity in a form that was more understandable and palatable. This approach sparked considerable controversy, with accusations of syncretism, but its effectiveness was undeniable. By respecting local traditions and integrating into native cultures, the Jesuits significantly increased their success in converting non-Christians and spreading their faith. The third sphere of their influence was political power and serving at royal courts. The Jesuits sought to influence society from the top down, becoming spiritual advisors and confidants to kings, ministers, and nobles. They held the prestigious position of royal confessor, a role of immense political importance. Through the confessional, they gained access to the most intimate thoughts and secrets of monarchs, enabling them to influence decisions and policies indirectly. This access allowed them to guide rulers in ways that promoted the interests of both the crown and the church, helping to shape internal and external political strategies. Such activities, these behind-the-scenes efforts, earned them a reputation as the grey eminences of European political life, master manipulators and schemers. They were accused of placing the order's interests above those of the state, employing any means necessary to achieve their goals. The phrase often associated with them, "the ends justify the means," was attributed to their philosophy, although there is no record that Loyola or any other Jesuit actually uttered those words. Nonetheless, the perception persisted that they operated in the shadows, pulling strings and whispering advice into the ears of the powerful, which cemented their reputation as master strategists and covert operators in European politics, even in cases where they justified regicide or the assassination of tyrants. The Jesuits saw no contradiction if the target's rule opposed the Catholic faith. Their intricate strategy, built on education, missionary activity, and political influence, transformed the Society of Jesus into the most formidable and agile force of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, which had begun to take shape in the mid-15th century. They demonstrated remarkable flexibility, intelligence, discipline, and unwavering dedication to their overarching mission. The Jesuits were the perfect instrument, forged in an era that called for solving an almost impossible challenge. Once they received papal approval, their members, like highly trained operatives, were dispatched into the heart of Europe's religious wars, acting as covert agents in a continent torn apart by conflict. Their primary goal was to stem the tide of Protestantism's spread and, where possible, to reclaim territories lost to heresy, and they achieved these objectives with astonishing efficiency. Their first and most critical battleground was Germany, the birthplace of the Reformation. To this vital front, the Jesuits sent their most capable forces, such as Peter Canisius. Born in the Netherlands, Canisius became a true evangelist for Catholicism in Germany. Instead of resorting to violence, he relied on persuasion, through words and exemplary conduct. He engaged in countless public debates with Protestant theologians, impressing them with his erudition and logical arguments. His most enduring contribution was the creation of a catechism, that provided a robust Catholic response to Martin Luther's writings, and this catechism went through hundreds of editions, becoming a cornerstone of Catholic education in Protestant-dominated areas. However, perhaps his most potent weapon was the network of Jesuit colleges he established, schools in Ingolstadt, Vienna, and Prague, which gradually became centres of Catholic revival and intellectual resistance against Protestant reforms. Canisius also served as spiritual advisor to Emperor Ferdinand I, strongly influencing him to pursue a rigorous counter-Reformation policy. Thanks largely to the efforts of Canisius and his fellow Jesuits, the southern German regions, Austria, Bohemia, and Bavaria, areas that had almost fully embraced Protestantism, began to revert back into the Catholic fold. A similarly intense struggle unfolded in Poland, filled with dramatic turns and significant influence. By the middle of the 15th century, the Polish nobility, known as the Szlachta, was increasingly converting to Calvinism and Lutheranism. The nation teetered on the brink of becoming a Protestant state, which alarmed Catholic authorities. In 1564, King Sigismund II August, who himself was uncertain in his faith, invited Jesuits into Poland to stem the Protestant tide. As they had in Germany, the Jesuits prioritized education, founding colleges that rapidly evolved into full-fledged universities. The most prominent of these was the Vilnius College, which soon became a university and turned into the central hub of Catholicism throughout Eastern Europe. They cultivated a new generation of Polish aristocrats, instilling in them a fierce Catholic zeal and a sense of religious unity. Jesuit Peter Skarga, court preacher to King Sigismund Augustus, delivered fiery sermons urging the nobility to see that Poland's vitality depended on its fidelity to the Catholic Church. Thanks to their efforts, by the end of the 16th century, Poland had become one of the most devout Catholic countries in Europe, serving as a bastion of Christianity in the East. The success of the Counter-Reformation in Poland, however, had tragic consequences. It heightened religious intolerance towards the Orthodox populations of Ukraine and Belarus, fueling future bloodshed and violent uprisings. In France, the Jesuits found themselves at the heart of the turmoil arising from the wars of the Huguenots. They acted as spiritual advisors to powerful members of the ultra-Catholic faction, notably the powerful House of Guise, thus becoming entwined in the violent conflicts that devastated the kingdom. Through their influence and strategic engagement, the Jesuits sought to reinforce Catholic authority and resist the rising tide of Protestantism across Europe, shaping the religious and political landscape of the continent for generations to come. They were accused of being among the main intellectual architects behind the infamous Saint Bartholomew's Night, a dark event marked by the massacre of Huguenots in Paris. When Henry of Navarre, a Protestant nobleman from France, ascended to the throne as Henry I, the Jesuits found themselves in opposition. This was primarily because, following some assassination attempts on the new king, perpetrated by fanatics, their order became a convenient target, and they were temporarily expelled from France. Yet, the political landscape was turbulent, and Henry IV, who eventually converted to Catholicism to strengthen his rule, was a pragmatic and shrewd ruler. Recognizing the immense influence and intellectual power wielded by the Jesuits, he swiftly reinstated them, placing a Jesuit, Pierre Coton, close to his court as his spiritual advisor. Henry IV's strategic goal was to leverage their formidable organizational and doctrinal resources for his own political survival. However, this alliance proved to be perilous and ultimately tragic. In the year of 2010, Henry IV was assassinated by a fanatic named Ravaillac, Although evidence of the Jesuits' direct involvement was never conclusively established, speculation, rumours, and dark suspicions continued to cast a long shadow over their reputation, linking them irreversibly to the event of the king's murder. A pivotal role was played by Jesuit theologians during this period, especially Diego Lainez and Alphonsus Almeron, who were prominent at the Council of Trent, held from 1658 to 1663. The Trent Council was often regarded as the defining moment of the Counter-Reformation, serving as a resolute response to the challenges posed by Protestantism. It reaffirmed and clarified key Catholic doctrines, such as salvation through faith and good works, the equal authority of Scripture and tradition, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, veneration of saints and images, and the doctrine of purgatory. The Council's decisions were uncompromising, aiming to solidify the Catholic Church's doctrinal foundations in the face of widespread reformist upheaval. Jesuits stood at the forefront of this intellectual effort, formulating and defending the Church's teachings with relentless precision. When words failed to sway opponents, they didn't hesitate to employ harsher measures. Their collaboration extended closely with the revived Roman Inquisition and the Spanish Inquisition, both of which became tools in their relentless campaign against heresy. Methods that ranged from doctrinal debate to interrogation and repression. In England, after Queen Elizabeth I firmly established the Protestant Reformation, Jesuits turned to clandestine operations to sustain Catholic faith within the country. They organised secret missions, risking their lives to carry out masses, preachings, and other religious activities underground. One of the most heroic figures among them was Edmund Campion, who secretly infiltrated England, risking everything to serve the Catholic community. His mission culminated in his capture, brutal torture in the Tower of London, and eventual execution. For Catholics, he became a martyr, sanctified for his unwavering faith. For the English authorities, he was a traitor and a dangerous spy. The Jesuits were also implicated in the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, an audacious conspiracy led by Guy Fawkes and other Catholic zealots aiming to blow up the English Parliament and, supposedly, King James I. Although direct proof of the order's involvement was never established, their spiritual advisor, known to have been a Jesuit, was implicated in the plot, which only intensified the black legend surrounding the Society of Jesus. Across Europe, Jesuits operated as a multifaceted force, simultaneously educators, inquisitors, diplomats, secret agents, martyrs, and political schemers. Their influence was pervasive and remarkably effective. They played an instrumental role in halting the tide of Protestant expansion and launched a profound internal renewal within the Catholic Church itself, often seen as a spiritual renaissance spurred by their efforts. Yet, the success came at a steep price. Their flexible methods, unwavering political engagement, and apparent moral ambiguity stirred suspicion, fear, and even hatred among their foes. To this day, centuries later, their presence and actions continue to evoke a mixture of admiration, controversy, and distrust, forming an indelible part of their complex, controversial legacy. While Europe was consumed by the flames of religious wars, the most daring and adventurous of Loyola's sons set out to conquer a different yet equally vital realm: the hearts and minds of people across newly discovered lands in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Missionary work became the greatest and perhaps most glorious endeavour of the Society of Jesus. These missionaries ventured into territories where no one else dared to go, carrying not only their faith, symbolised by the cross, but also the most advanced knowledge of European science. Their methods, revolutionary in every sense, transformed the very approach to spreading Christianity. The first and most illustrious Jesuit missionary was one of Ignatius Loyola's earliest companions, Francis Xavier. A fiery Basque, noble by birth, and an accomplished athlete, Xavier embodied the missionary zeal that fueled the society's expansion. In Odna Tisicha Piatsot Sorok Adin, at the behest of the Portuguese king, he embarked eastward, setting out on a journey that, over 10 extraordinary years, seemed almost beyond human capability. Xavier preached along the coast of Goa, in India, where he fought against the moral decay of Portuguese colonists and baptized thousands of fishermen in the surrounding villages. His relentless efforts took him to the Maluku Islands, the Spice Archipelago at the heart of the Indonesian chain. Yet, his most significant and challenging destination became Japan. Arriving in Japan in Odna Tisicha Betsot Sorak Devet, Xavier was the first Christian missionary to set foot in the land of the rising sun. The country left a profound impression on him, as he discovered a civilization far from being a land of savages. It was a highly developed society with rich cultural traditions, sophisticated philosophies, and a warrior aristocracy, the samurai class. Recognizing that he could not simply adopt the tactics he used elsewhere, Xavier altered his appearance. Instead of his plain robes, he wore silk garments to gain the favor of local daimyo, Japanese feudal lords. He engaged in theological debates with Buddhist monks, trying to find common ground amid complex spiritual differences. Xavier was captivated by the Japanese code of honor, yet at the same time he was perplexed by certain questions posed by the Japanese people. For example, they asked him, if there is only one true God, why was this knowledge not known in China? From where did all the wisdom that the world possesses originate? These questions led Xavier to realize a crucial truth. The key to converting all of Asia was rooted in China. Despite his earnest efforts, he passed away in Udne Tisicha Patsot Pyatdesat Dva on a small island near China's coast, having never succeeded in entering the vast and mysterious Middle Kingdom itself. However, he laid important groundwork, opening the path for future missionaries and believers to approach China's doors. During his brief life, it is estimated that Xavier baptized tens of thousands of people and laid the foundations for the Christian presence in Asia. The mission Xavier dreamed of, bringing Christianity to China, was realized by the Italian Matteo Ricci, an extraordinary figure in the history of East-West cultural exchange. Ricci understood the mistake of many earlier missionaries, approaching China as if it were a primitive society in dire need of rescuing and insisting that its millennial wisdom was fundamentally mistaken. Instead, Ricci adopted a strategy of cultural adaptation. He dedicated years to mastering the Chinese language and studying the classics of Confucian philosophy. Leaving behind his Jesuit robes, he dressed in silk robes typical of Chinese scholars, thereby becoming a Mandarin, a learned official of the empire. Ricci's approach was not to preach loudly in the streets, but to cultivate friendships with the Chinese intellectual elite. His charm and knowledge enabled him to gain genuine respect among scholars and officials, rather than mere converts. Ricci's influence stemmed less from church doctrines and more from the impressive array of European scientific achievements that he brought with him. He introduced the Chinese to the latest European scientific instruments, such as astronomical devices, clocks, prisms, and, most notably, a detailed world map. This combination of cultural sensitivity and scientific prowess allowed Ricci to plant seeds of curiosity and admiration that would, over time, facilitate the integration of Christianity into Chinese society. In essence, Ricci's vision and methods epitomized a new, enlightened approach to intercultural dialogue, one rooted in respect, understanding, and the exchange of knowledge, paving the way for a deeper, more respectful engagement between East and West. This map caused a sensation within the imperial court. For the first time, the Chinese, who regarded their nation as the centre of the universe surrounded by barbarian peoples, were presented with a true picture of the world's vastness, a glimpse into the lands of America, Europe, and other distant regions. This newfound perspective opened their eyes to the vast scale of human existence beyond their familiar borders. The Jesuits, led by figures like Ricci and their companions, became esteemed court astronomers and mathematicians in Beijing. They dedicated themselves to correcting the Chinese calendar, translating Euclid's works into Chinese, and familiarizing Chinese scholars with European art, music, and scientific knowledge. Through these efforts, they gradually earned respect and recognition as learned men and wise advisors. Only after establishing their credibility did they begin to cautiously introduce and speak about their Christian faith. Ricci, in particular, tried to demonstrate that Christianity was not at odds with Confucianism, but could, in fact, complement and complete it. He permitted Chinese converts to perform ancestral rites and rituals honoring Confucius, considering these ceremonies civic rather than religious in nature. This approach, known as the Chinese rites, proved effective in gaining acceptance for Christianity and allowed the Jesuits to establish thriving Christian communities within the heart of the Forbidden City, in the imperial capital itself. However, this method later encountered opposition from the Vatican, which condemned the Chinese rites, leading to a ban on Christianity's propagation in China and a severance of the Church's mission efforts there. A similar strategy was employed by Roberto de Nobili in southern India. Recognizing that the caste system posed an insurmountable obstacle to missionary success, he understood that Christianity itself was being conflated with Portuguese colonialism and thus despised by the highest caste, the Brahmins. To overcome this barrier, de Nobili decided to become a Brahmin himself. He secluded himself in a remote hut, adopting the lifestyle of a Hindu ascetic, a sannyasi. He learned Sanskrit, Tamil, and Telugu with great diligence, and immersed himself in studying sacred Hindu texts, such as the Vedas and Upanishads. By doing so, he sought to present himself not as a Portuguese outsider, but as a genuine Brahmin originating from Rome, and claimed to possess the lost fourth Veda. He allowed new converts to retain their caste symbols, such as the sacred thread and the sandalwood paste on their foreheads, to ease their integration into the community. His methods sparked fierce debates and criticism, yet they proved remarkably effective in penetrating the upper echelons of Indian society, bringing Christianity into the highest social circles. In a truly unique and ambitious experiment, the Jesuits undertook a profound mission deep into South America, specifically among the Guarani tribe living in what are now Paraguay, Argentina, and parts of Brazil. Far from colonial authorities and outside the influence of Spanish or Portuguese rulers, they established an entire network of settlements called reductions. These settlements resembled autonomous Christian communes, a kind of theocratic, communal society that combined spiritual life with social organization. The Jesuits gathered nomadic indigenous groups into large, well-planned villages centered around churches and craft workshops. They endeavored to teach the Guarani about Christianity, literacy, music, and craftsmanship. The indigenous choirs and orchestras they formed gained fame throughout South America, celebrated for their music and art. Life in the reductions was highly regimented and strictly controlled by a handful of Jesuit fathers. The land was communal, private ownership was abolished, and all work served the collective well-being. Food and resources were distributed according to need, ensuring equality among residents. The Jesuits also protected the Guarani from the cruelty and exploitation inflicted by Spanish and Portuguese colonists, including slavers. Recognizing the threat of armed slave raids, they even formed and trained a Guarani army, armed with firearms, capable of defending themselves and repelling attacks. Over a span of more than 150 years, these reductions became thriving communities, housing more than 100,000 indigenous people, a remarkable achievement that combined religious conversion, social reform, and indigenous resistance against colonizers. For some historians, the Society of Jesus represented one of the most humane and successful social experiments in human history. It was, in many ways, a triumph of humanism, a testament to ingenuity and perseverance. To others, however, it embodied a harsh, totalitarian regime, one that stripped indigenous peoples of their freedoms and reduced them to obedient children under a paternalistic authority. Regardless of these differing perspectives, this unique and daring experiment was abruptly and cruelly interrupted when the Jesuits were expelled from Spanish territories. The once thriving reductions, complexes developed for missionizing indigenous populations, were dismantled, their inhabitants either enslaved, scattered, or dispersed. These events highlight the extraordinary resilience, adaptability, and dedication of Jesuit missionaries. They were more than simple preachers. They served also as explorers, linguists, scientists, and diplomats. They provided Europe with detailed information about the civilizations of China and India, produced maps of the Amazon basin, documented the curare plant, and developed the first treatment for malaria. Their missionary activities permanently altered the religious and cultural landscape of the world, leaving a deep imprint. Yet, alongside their achievements, their methods, often controversial, and the immense wealth accumulated by mission territories, became a source of envy and hatred among their many enemies. Never before in history had a religious order incited such persistent, irrational, and all-encompassing hatred as the Society of Jesus. Over centuries, their name became a symbol of treachery, duplicity, conspiracy, and moral ambiguity. An entire mythos developed around them, with the infamous label, the Black Legend, attached to their reputation. They were depicted as a sinister secret society, weaving a web that ensnared the entire world, masterminds pulling the strings of kings and popes alike in clandestine plots. Where did this hatred originate? It stemmed from a variety of sources, fueled both by genuine mistakes and misjudgments committed by the order, and by outright lies and slander. Ironically, some of the most passionate critics of the Jesuits were their very colleagues within the Catholic Church. Older monastic orders, such as the Dominicans and Franciscans, viewed the rapid rise of the Jesuits with suspicion and envy. They resented the influence the Jesuits wielded at the papal court and their successes in proselytizing efforts around the world. A fierce ideological clash unfolded, especially between the Dominicans, followers of the theology of Thomas Aquinas, and the Jesuits, who developed their own distinct theological school. One of the central disputes concerned the doctrine of grace, a deeply intricate theological debate about the relationship between divine predestination and human free will. The main internal adversaries of the Jesuits, however, were the Jansenists, a strict and rigorous movement that arose in France during the 15th century, bearing similarities in spirit to Calvinism. The Jansenists accused the Jesuits of moral laxity, arguing that in their efforts to attract as many followers as possible, the Jesuits had compromised their moral standards, becoming too lenient and indulgent concerning human weaknesses. Their chief point of critique was the Jesuits' casuistry, a branch of moral theology which deals with complex, case-based scenarios where applying universal moral principles becomes difficult. Jesuit confessors, especially those serving in courtly environments, frequently encountered morally ambiguous dilemmas, and critics argued that their flexible approach to ethics undermined the moral fabric of society. They devised a highly intricate system that allowed them to craft excuses for actions that, under normal circumstances, could be deemed morally questionable or even outright sinful, so long as those actions were committed with good intentions, or if there existed a credible opinion from a respected theologian permitting such conduct. This approach, known as probabilism, essentially involved justifying morally ambiguous acts by referencing the opinions of authoritative scholars who might have permitted them. For instance, one could wonder whether lying to save a life was acceptable, or if killing a tyrant pursuing what he claimed to be the true faith was justified. To their enemies, especially among the Jesuits' critics, this flexible moral doctrine appeared as the height of cynicism and hypocrisy. They accused the Jesuits of being willing to justify any sin, whether it was falsehood, perjury, theft, or even murder, if such acts served the greater glory of God, or, as critics argued, the increased prestige of the order itself. The reputation of Jesuit casuistry was dramatically shaken by the French philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal. In his famous series of letters to a provincial, written in 1656 and 1657, Pascal boldly supported the Jesuit informants, but did so with biting sarcasm and deadly irony. He satirized their moral theology by quoting their own authors, exposing what he saw as the absurdity and moral looseness embedded in their reasoning. Pascal's letters swiftly became a bestseller across Europe, causing irreparable damage to the order's image. They fostered a widespread perception of the Jesuits as duplicitous hypocrites, masters of cunning tricks, capable of justifying even the basest acts. For Protestants, the Jesuits became the quintessential enemies, soldiers of the papacy, the enforcers of the Counter-Reformation, orchestrators of persecution and the Inquisition. In countries like England and Holland, the Jesuit was a notorious figure in political pamphlets and caricatures, cast as a sinister conspirator, lurking behind the scenes, weaving plots to overthrow states. The Jesuits were depicted as secretive schemers, allegedly involved in fabricating Reformation plots and organizing assassinations, all aimed at restoring the countries to what was portrayed as the rule of the Antichrist in Rome. During the Enlightenment in the 15th and 16th centuries, the ranks of the Jesuit-phobic grew even larger, as leading philosophers and thinkers who championed rationalism and human liberty saw the order as the embodiment of everything they opposed: religious fanaticism, obscurantism, and the suppression of free thought. Notable Enlightenment figures like Voltaire and Diderot regarded the Jesuits as the antithesis of progress, because they controlled the education system and fiercely guarded orthodoxy to preserve the Church's dominance. Interestingly, Voltaire, who was himself an alumnus of a Jesuit college and highly appreciated his education there, launched a relentless campaign against them. His famous final letter to the Geneva pastor ended with the rallying cry, "Crush the order," referring not only to the Church as a whole, but specifically to the Jesuit order itself. Yet, in the final analysis, the most dangerous enemies of the Jesuits were not theologians or philosophers, but the monarchs of the 15th century, rulers seeking absolute power within their realms, perceived the Jesuit order as a principal threat to their sovereignty. The Jesuits indeed functioned as a kind of state within a state, an autonomous entity wielding vast wealth, controlling education, and exerting influence over the aristocracy. But what most alarmed monarchs was their unwavering allegiance to the papal authority, trusting the Pope, who resided beyond the mountains and the Alps, above national rulers in hierarchy and influence. The fourth meal of the Jesuit daily routine, referring to their vows of loyalty, was perceived by kings as a gesture of allegiance to a foreign power. To them, the Jesuits resembled a foreign army in their own lands, ultramontanes, who considered the Pope's authority superior to that of any national monarch. This belief led kings to view the Jesuits as potential traitors, a sort of clandestine force allied with foreign interests, capable of betraying their countries from within. Their doctrine, asserting that the people possessed the inherent right to overthrow or even kill a monarch who had become a tyrant and an enemy of faith, was utterly unacceptable to absolute monarchies. These rulers aimed to establish a national church entirely under their control, a church that answered solely to the monarchy. The Jesuits, with their independent influence and powerful network, stood in direct opposition to this vision. All these factors, jealousy from other religious orders, criticism from intellectuals, the growing hatred from Protestants, and suspicions harboured by monarchs, became entangled in a dense, unbreakable knot of conflict. By the middle of the 15th century, the clouds of suspicion and hostility over the Society of Jesus had gathered ominously. The notorious Black Legend had solidified into a widely accepted truth, casting the order in the role of a malevolent force. Having risen to considerable heights of power and influence, the Jesuits found themselves increasingly isolated, surrounded by enemies from every side. Their fall, it seemed, was merely a matter of time. Ironically, this downfall often began on the fringes, far from the central halls of power. The first country to strike a decisive blow against the Society of Jesus was Portugal. Here, the de facto ruler was the influential Prime Minister, the Marquis of Pombal, a powerful figure who wielded the authority of King Joseph I. Pombal embodied the archetype of the enlightened despot, an energetic reformer intent on modernizing his nation and strengthening royal authority. To him, the Jesuits represented the ultimate obstacle to his plans. They controlled education, maintained significant influence at court, and, most critically, governed their own independent territory, Brazil and Paraguay, hindering Pombal's efforts to exploit the colony's vast resources. Pombal initiated a systematic campaign aimed at discrediting the Jesuits by accusing them of every imaginable crime and moral failing. An opportune pretext appeared in 1758, when an assassination attempt was made on the king. Without concrete evidence, Pombal swiftly blamed the Jesuits for the conspiracy. This accusation led to a cascade of arrests, torture, and show trials, spectacles designed to condemn the order publicly. By the following year, Pombal issued a royal decree expelling all Jesuits from Portugal and its colonies, confiscating their property and assets. Hundreds of priests were captured, placed on ships, and forcibly transported like common cargo to land in the papal territories of Italy. Those believed to be the leaders of the conspiracy faced imprisonment in damp, underground dungeons, where many succumbed to their harsh conditions. Pombal's actions sent a powerful signal across Europe, igniting similar campaigns elsewhere. The next nation to take a stand was France. In France, the Jesuits already faced numerous enemies: Yankee-style liberals, philosophers, and Enlightenment thinkers, all of whom viewed the order as an obstacle to progress. The Paris Parliament, the highest judicial authority, was particularly fierce in its hostility, fiercely guarding the Gallican liberties, those traditional rights of the French Church, against the encroaching influence of Rome, which the Jesuits symbolized. The trigger for the French attack was a financial scandal. Father Antoine Lavallée, the Jesuit mission head in Martinique, had undertaken an ambitious commercial enterprise alongside his ecclesiastical duties. When his ships were captured by the English during the 7 Years' War, he went bankrupt, leaving enormous debts to merchants in Marseille. The creditors sued, demanding that the Jesuit order be held accountable for his liabilities. The Jesuits made a critical error by refusing to settle the debts, and instead submitting the matter to the Paris Parliament for arbitration. The Parliament, already harbouring deep animosity toward the Jesuits, saw an opportunity to strike a decisive blow. It not only compelled the order to pay the debts, but proceeded to launch a full-scale investigation into its activities. Under intense pressure from the court and from Madame de Pompadour, the favourite of King Louis XV, the Jesuits were declared heretics and enemies of the state in 1875. Their colleges and properties were confiscated, and the order was formally suppressed in France. This event triggered a chain reaction, encouraging similar measures in other parts of Europe, and marked the beginning of a broad crackdown on the Society of Jesus across the continent. In the year of our Lord 1767, King Charles II of Spain, a ruler often regarded as a monarch of the Enlightenment, decided to follow the example set by his neighbouring European powers. He initiated a decisive and forceful operation aimed at dissolving the Society of Jesus, commonly known as the Jesuits, both within his realm and across his vast colonial empire. This action was carried out not as a mere administrative decree, but as a full-scale military campaign. On a single secret night, under the king's direct orders, soldiers swiftly surrounded all Jesuit colleges and missions throughout Spain and its overseas territories. In total, approximately 6,000 Jesuits were arrested, herded onto ships, and promptly deported to Italy, effectively removing them from their spheres of influence. Similar measures were applied in the Kingdom of Naples, on the island of Malta, and in other regions under Bourbon control. This coordinated crackdown marked a significant turning point, as all Catholic monarchs belonging to the Bourbon dynasty, namely France, Spain, and the Kingdom of Naples, joined forces in applying tremendous pressure on the Holy See. Their intense diplomatic and political efforts culminated in a demand for the complete and irrevocable dissolution of the Society of Jesus. Pope Clement XIII, known for his courage and steadfastness, strongly resisted these pressures. Yet, following his death, a conclave quickly convened and elected a new Pope, Clement XIV, who was seen as more amenable to the monarch's wishes. After nearly 4 years of tense negotiations, threats, and diplomatic blackmail, during which the kings even hinted at breaking relations with Rome, Pope Clement XIV finally capitulated. On the 21st of July, in the year of our Lord 1773, he issued a papal brief, or papal bull, titled Dominus et Redemptor. In this document, the Pope, without explicitly condemning the Society of Jesus as an institution, declared its dissolution, effectively announcing its disbanding and destruction for all future time, citing the need to preserve peace within the Catholic Church. This marked a triumph not only for the enlightened monarchs, but also for their enemies of the order. The general of the Jesuits, Lorenzo Ricci, was swiftly arrested and imprisoned in the Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome, where he would eventually die, steadfastly refusing to recognize his guilt. The vast property and assets of the Jesuit society were confiscated by the state, symbolizing a severe blow to the organization. For more than 2 centuries, the Society of Jesus had stood as a formidable pillar of papal authority and influence, guiding Catholic education, missions, and spiritual life across the world. Yet now it was formally disbanded and publicly humiliated by the very Pope it had once served so loyally, It seemed as though the story of the Society of Jesus had reached a dismal and inglorious end, a history closing on a note of perceived defeat. However, history, with its characteristic sense of irony, was not willing to allow such a noble order to vanish entirely. The Society, founded to combat heresy and schism, found a clandestine refuge in countries that the Catholic world regarded as heretical or schismatic, notably the brand new Protestant Kingdom of Prussia, under King Frederick the Great, who deeply appreciated the Jesuits' teaching excellence, refused to publish the papal brief and maintained the Jesuit colleges in Silesia. Yet, the most significant ally and protector of the Jesuits during their exile was none other than Empress Catherine II of Russia. Following the first partition of Poland, vast territories of Belarus, richly endowed with a network of Jesuit schools, became part of the Russian Empire. As an enlightened ruler herself, Catherine understood the vital role these institutions played in education and intellectual development. She forbade the publication of the papal brief and allowed the Society of Jesus to continue its work, permitting it to operate openly within her territories. Under her protection, and in the shadow of the mighty Russian Empire, the remnants of the once powerful Jesuit army lingered, patiently awaiting their moment to rise again. For the next 40 years, the society was officially suppressed, yet the spirit of the Jesuits endured. In secret, among small groups and covert cells, former members kept their activities alive, maintaining the order's traditions and objectives. Meanwhile, the world around them underwent rapid and transformative change. The fierce flames of the French Revolution erupted, overthrowing old regimes and dismantling the ancient order of monarchy that so feared the influence of the Jesuits. Later, the armies of Napoleon swept across Europe, further dismantling the old political and social structures. The Catholic Church itself endured harrowing persecutions. Pope Pius VI died in captivity during France's occupation, while his successor, Pius VI, was imprisoned by Napoleon's forces. After Napoleon's defeat and the collapse of his empire, Europe entered an era of restoration, attempting to rebuild and re-establish traditional orders and institutions. Thus, the story of the Society of Jesus, though seemingly extinguished, continued in the shadows, resilient and undying, quietly awaiting its next chapter in history. Monarchs, driven by their fears of revolutionary upheaval, sought solace and support in conservative institutions, primarily turning to the Church. In their search for stabilizing forces, they recalled the most formidable allies of the papal authority, its most loyal soldiers. It was in the year of 1914 that Pope Pius VII, having returned to Rome after being held captive during the Napoleonic Wars, took decisive action to restore the influence of the Catholic Church. Through a papal bull which reaffirmed the rights and privileges of all religious orders, he officially reinstated the Society of Jesus, popularly known as the Jesuits, effectively rebirthed them from the ashes like the mythic phoenix. Although the revived order no longer wielded the political power it once enjoyed during the glorious periods of the 10th and 11th centuries, it quickly regained prominence in the realms of education and scientific inquiry. The Jesuits began expanding their influence by founding new universities across the globe, such as Georgetown University in the United States, and establishing observatories, advancing the frontiers of knowledge. Notably, it was among their scholarly ranks that modern theories of the Big Bang were formulated, and extensive ethnographic and linguistic research was conducted. They adapted themselves to the demands of a changing world, shifting their focus toward intellectual evangelism and the promotion of social justice. But what exactly were these sons of Ignatius Loyola? Simultaneously a secret army of the Catholic Church, or master manipulators of European politics. As is often the case with historical assessment, the reality resides somewhere in between, a nuanced picture far more complex than a simple dichotomy. Undoubtedly, they operated as an elite forces unit. Their rigorous training, impeccable discipline, remarkable mobility, and high intellectual caliber set them apart. Their unwavering dedication to their mission often saw them engaging in perilous undertakings and risking or even sacrificing their lives as they worked tirelessly to preserve Catholicism across Europe, shielding it from collapse. They played a pivotal role in spreading Christianity to the most remote corners of the world and built an educational system arguably the most advanced of its era, an enduring legacy of their pursuit of knowledge and influence. These achievements form the core of their greatness and serve as a testament to their historical significance. Yet, they were also master manipulators and schemers. Their close ties to political powers, their frequent presence at royal courts, and their flexible morality often placed them at the heart of covert power struggles. Their pursuit of influence and authority meant that they sometimes engaged in murky political games and behind-the-scenes intrigues. Masters of clandestine manoeuvring, their activities at times sharply diverged from the moral and spiritual ideals espoused by the gospel. They were products of their turbulent epoch, a time marked by religious fervour, absolutism, and Machiavellian politics. This duality between noble service and cunning intrigue defined their history, encapsulating both their contribution to civilization and the tragedies they endured or caused. The story of the Society of Jesus reflects the profound complexity, grandeur, and moral ambiguity of European history in the modern era. It is a tale about how the will of a single individual, shaped through suffering and perseverance, can influence the course of the world. It speaks of the power of faith intertwined with knowledge, of self-sacrifice rooted in conviction, and of the relentless human pursuit of influence, both divine and earthly. It is a narrative woven with themes of sanctity and sin, heroism and treachery, and yet it is far from over. In the year of the 2013th, the world witnessed an unprecedented event, the election of a Jesuit Pope, Francis I, to the papal throne, a figure emerging from the ranks of the most controversial and yet highly effective military force in the history of the Catholic Church. A soldier in white, the first Jesuit Pope, standing as a symbol of transformation and continuity. Thank you for dedicating this time to delve into one of the most fascinating and complex histories of spiritual, political, and social movements that have shaped our world. If this journey through time has resonated with you, consider exploring more stories about great events and influential figures who have left their mark on history. Your attention and interest are the greatest rewards for this effort, inspiring further discoveries and reflections on the enduring legacy of mankind's pursuits and struggles.